My mom called me 2 weeks before Christmas and casually announced I would be watching my brother's 5 kids over the entire holiday so he could relax and enjoy himself, and I let her finish every word before I told her what my Christmas actually looked like. I remember the exact second I decided to nobody will ever know. That was it. That was the whole thought. 4 words that cost me everything I had spent 6 years building, and I told myself it was nothing, it was just conversation, it was just 2 people who happened to find each other interesting, and Marcus was right there, 20 feet away, sleeping in the bed we shared, completely unaware that his girlfriend was dismantling their entire future one message at a time. I need you to understand who Marcus was before I tell you what I did to him. Marcus Ellery was the kind of man women write about in journals they never show anyone. Steady. Thoughtful. The type who remembered that you mentioned, 8 months ago, that you were nervous about a presentation, and texted you that morning just to say he believed in you. We had been together 6 years. We had a daughter, Cora, who was 4 years old and completely obsessed with her father in the way that small children are when they've been raised by someone who actually shows up. He coached her little Saturday morning soccer games even when he'd worked a double the night before. He carried her on his shoulders through parking lots so her feet wouldn't get cold. He was present in a way that I had stopped appreciating somewhere around year 3, when I started looking at our life and seeing a ceiling instead of a foundation. That's the part I hate about myself the most. Not the cheating. The ingratitude. Derek Calloway came into my life through work. He was a contractor our firm brought in for a remodel project, and he had this energy about him, this loose, easy confidence, like he had never once lost sleep over anything. He was funny in a way that felt effortless. He remembered my coffee order after one meeting. He texted first, always, and his texts were clever and quick and nothing like the steady, practical check-ins Marcus sent between 12-hour shifts. And I know how that sounds. I know. But when you've been comfortable for so long that comfort starts to feel like being buried alive, someone who makes you feel like a discovery instead of a habit becomes a gravity you are not prepared for. My friends didn't help. I want to be honest about that because I spent a long time blaming them and then eventually had to stop when I realized I was a grown woman who made her own choices. But Simone and Bree had been pushing a particular narrative for almost a year. Marcus was boring. Marcus was safe. Didn't I feel like I was just, settling? Simone had left her husband for someone she met at a rooftop bar and called it the bravest thing she'd ever done. Bree was perpetually single and made it sound like freedom. Every dinner, every wine night, every casual scroll through social media where I watched women my age seemingly living these enormous, luminous lives, I absorbed the message that what I had wasn't enough, and the person delivering it most loudly was me. I started meeting Derek for lunch. Just lunch. Then lunch started running long. Then one afternoon in November, we were sitting in his truck outside my office building and he leaned over and I let him, and I drove home that evening and sat in the driveway for 12 minutes before I went inside and kissed Marcus on the cheek and asked what he wanted for dinner. Cora was on the living room floor building something out of blocks. She held one up and announced it was a castle. I went to the kitchen and gripped the edge of the sink. For 3 weeks I lived in 2 places at once without physically going anywhere. I was present in my house and absent in every way that mattered. I looked at Marcus and felt a guilt so physical it was almost like a fever, and instead of letting that guilt stop me I let it drive me further in, because that's what guilt does when you refuse to reckon with it. It becomes resentment. I started looking for reasons Marcus wasn't enough. The way he left his shoes by the door instead of the closet. The way he fell asleep during movies. The way he was just so there, so constant, so reliable, as if reliability were a character flaw. Derek, meanwhile, was telling me things. That I was extraordinary. That someone like me shouldn't be invisible. That Marcus didn't see me, not really. And I listened to all of it because I wanted to, because it was easier to believe I was a woman being wasted than to admit I was a woman making a catastrophic choice. I told myself 100 lies. I catalog them now like evidence. It's not serious. It's just an emotional outlet. Marcus and I are basically roommates anyway. This doesn't count as cheating if nothing is going to come of it. Derek makes me feel alive. I deserve to feel alive. I'm a better mother when I'm happy. Cora won't notice. Nobody will get. Every single one of those was a lie I invented to protect myself from the truth, which was simple and brutal. I was betraying a man who loved me completely, and I was doing it because I was bored and flattered and too gutless to either fix my relationship or leave it honestly. The physical part started in early December. I don't need to detail it. What I will tell you is that in the moments after, lying in the dark of a hotel room while Derek scrolled his phone, I felt nothing that resembled what I had expected to feel. No liberation. No aliveness. Just a cold, spreading awareness that I had crossed a line that did not uncross, and the face that kept appearing in my mind was not Marcus's. It was Cora's. Her up in the morning asking where Mama was. her little hand reaching. I pushed it down. I was extraordinary at pushing things down by then. Christmas was 2 weeks away. Marcus had requested the holiday week off months in advance, one of the rare full weeks he'd managed in 2 years, and he had this whole plan: tree cutting, cookie baking, Cora's first visit to see the lights downtown. He had shown me the itinerary. He had actually made an itinerary. I remember thinking it was dorky and sweet, and now I would give everything I owned to go back to that moment and choose differently. Then my mother called. I was in the parking garage at work, engine running, phone on the passenger seat, and she called and I answered because I always answered my mother. Her name is Diane, and Diane operates under the assumption that the world exists to accommodate her preferences, a belief she has held since approximately 1987 and has never once examined. She started talking and I listened, and what she was saying, delivered in the cheerful, breezy tone she uses when she has already decided something and is merely notifying you of the decision, was this. My brother Cole had 5 children. 5. Ages 2 through 9, and they were a beautiful natural disaster of a family unit, loud and sticky and genuinely exhausting in the way that packs of small children are. Cole and his wife Patrice were planning to spend the holiday in Sedona. Just the 2 of them. A reset, my mother explained, because Cole had been under a lot of pressure at work and he deserved to decompress and Patrice needed the break, and wasn't it wonderful that I was right there, so available, with my stable home in my big yard, and Marcus was so good with kids. So it just made sense that Cora and her 5 cousins would all spend Christmas week with me. She said all of this in one long, confident stream. She did not ask. She presented it as a completed fact, the way someone announces a weather forecast. I let her finish. Every single word. I sat in that parking garage with the engine running and I let my mother lay out the entire plan: Cole's travel dates, the kids' schedules, the dietary preferences of a 2-year-old, which apparently included nothing beige. I let her get all the way to the end, to the part where she said, "So I told Cole you'd be thrilled," and then I was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then I told her what my Christmas actually looked like. Not the version she knew. The version she didn't. The version where Marcus had scheduled a rare full week off, and I had spent that week destroying everything he had tried to build with me. The version where I had been gone, not physically but entirely, for weeks. The version where I had a 4-year-old daughter who deserved a mother who was present and I was barely surviving the guilt of how absent I had already been. The version where I was not, in any universe, capable of managing 5 additional children over Christmas while my relationship was actively collapsing under the weight of what I had done. I didn't tell her all of that. Obviously. I told her I couldn't do it. That Marcus had plans. That we had plans. My mother's voice dropped into the register she reserves for profound disappointment. She told me family was family. She told me Cole needed this. She told me I was being selfish, that word landing with a precision she did not intend, and I almost laughed, sitting alone in that parking garage, because selfish was the most accurate thing anyone had called me in months and she didn't even know why. I hung up and sat there. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Something casual. Something that 2 weeks ago would have made my stomach lift and now made me feel like I was looking at evidence against myself. I drove home. Marcus was in the kitchen. Cora was already bathed, in her pajamas, sitting on the counter while he made her the specific shape of toast she liked, the triangles. He looked up when I walked in. Just looked up and smiled. Not a performance. Not a greeting designed to impress. Just a man who was glad his partner was home. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed. I put my face in my hands. And I made a decision. Not the right one. I made the decision to go back down there and act normal, to get through Christmas, to let the thing with Derek dissolve quietly, to never tell Marcus, to simply stop and pretend it had not happened and be better, be present, be the person he thought I was. I had been making catastrophically stupid decisions for 2 months. I was not finished yet. It was Simone who ended it. Not out of guilt. Not out of loyalty to me. Simone had met Derek at my office holiday party, the one I should never have brought her to, and Simone had flirted with him openly, and I had felt something I had no right to feel, which was jealousy, and Derek had noticed, and apparently what happened after that was that Derek and Simone had exchanged numbers and had a conversation that I was not part of, and in that conversation Derek said things about me, specific things that made Simone realize the scope of what had been happening and made her feel, I think, both guilty and self-righteous, which is a combination that in Simone has always produced action. She texted Marcus on December 19th. I don't know exactly what she wrote. I never found out. What I know is that I was putting Cora to bed, reading her the book about the bear who couldn't sleep, doing all the voices the way she liked, and Marcus appeared in the doorway of her bedroom. He stood there. He had his phone in his hand, down at his side, and he looked at me with an expression I did not have a name for then and still don't now. It wasn't rage. It wasn't tears. It was something beyond both of those, something that lives on the other side of a line that once crossed cannot be approached again. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Cora. Then he walked away. I kept reading. My voice didn't shake. I finished the book. I kissed her forehead. I turned off the lamp. I walked down the hall on legs that didn't feel attached to my body, and I found Marcus in the kitchen, standing at the sink, his back to me, very still. I stood in the doorway. He didn't turn around. The silence in that kitchen was not an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was everything we had ever been to each other, sitting between us, waiting to be acknowledged before it disappeared. He set his phone face up on the counter. He turned around. He looked at me the way you look at something you are trying to memorize because you know you are seeing it for the last time. His mouth opened. Then it closed. He picked up his keys. He walked past me, close enough that I could have touched him, and I didn't, and he went out the front door, and it closed behind him, not a slam, not a dramatic exit, just a door closing, the quietest, most devastating sound I have ever heard. I stood in the kitchen alone. Cora called from her room, asking for water. I filled a cup. I carried it down the hall. I handed it to her in the dark. She drank it with both hands around the cup the way small children do, careful and serious, and then she handed it back and said, "Where's Daddy?" I told her he went to get something from the car. She nodded and lay back down. I stood in her doorway and watched her close her eyes, and I understood, with a clarity that arrived too late to be useful, exactly what I had done. Marcus didn't come back that night. He didn't come back the next night either. He came back on the third day, in the afternoon while I was at work, and I know this because when I got home the closet had spaces in it that hadn't been there before, and his bathroom shelf was cleared, and his side of the dresser was empty, and on the kitchen table there was a single document with the name of a family attorney printed at the top. I sat down at that table and read every word. He wasn't asking for much. He was asking for Cora. Not full custody, not in that first document, but primary residency, which anyone who has been through a custody arrangement knows is the version that matters. Primary residency meant she slept at his house. Primary residency meant her school was near his house. Primary residency meant I became the parent who visited, who scheduled, who called ahead, who stood at a door waiting to be let into the life of my own child. I called him 12 times over 3 days. He did not answer once. He did not text back. He had simply, cleanly, and completely stopped acknowledging my existence, with the exception of a single message he sent through the attorney, which contained 4 sentences and 0 emotion, and was the most efficient communication I have ever received from a person who once wrote me letters by hand. Derek stopped responding the same week. Not a breakup. Not a conversation. Not even the dignity of a final message. He simply went quiet the way a machine goes quiet when you unplug it, no drama, no processing, just absence. I found out later, through the particular cruelty of mutual professional contacts, that he had moved to another project across the city and was seeing someone new by January. He told people at my firm that things had gotten complicated with a colleague. He did not use my name, which was somehow worse than if he had. I had destroyed my relationship for a man who couldn't be bothered to send a goodbye. Simone called me once, right after she told Marcus. She called to tell me she had done what she did because she felt I was out of control and she was worried about Cora, and I want to be fair to her, I want to be honest, because part of that was probably true. But Simone also had a history of wanting what other people had, and she had looked at Derek at that party with a very specific kind of interest, and whether the motivation was genuine concern or something more complicated, the result was the same. She had detonated my life and then called to explain her reasoning, and when I didn't respond the way she needed me to, she stopped calling too. Bree sided with Simone. I don't know what version of the story she was given, but the version she believed made me the villain with no context and no humanity, which was not entirely inaccurate but was still delivered with more enthusiasm than friendship required. Within 2 weeks of Marcus leaving, my primary social circle had reorganized itself entirely, and I was on the outside of it, looking at group chats I had been quietly removed from, seeing plans made on Instagram by people who had been in my wedding shower. I had not been married. We had talked about it. Marcus had a ring. I found out later from his sister, Janelle, who was the only person in that entire extended world who spoke to me with any consistency, that he had bought it in October, that he had been waiting for the right moment, that the moment he had planned was Christmas Eve, that he had arranged the whole evening, Cora in her dress, a photographer he had hired to capture the moment. Janelle told me this not to wound me but because she was the kind of woman who believed people deserved the full truth, and she was right, and it wounded me anyway. He had been planning to propose the same month I was in a hotel room with someone else. Christmas came. I spent it in my apartment, which I had moved into in the third week of December after it became clear that staying in the house we had shared was not something I could afford alone and not something I could emotionally survive regardless. My mother called on December 23rd, not to check on me, but to circle back to the Cole situation, to report that the arrangements had fallen through and now Patrice's mother was watching the kids, and wasn't that a shame because I had been so difficult about it. She did not know yet what had happened with Marcus. I hadn't told her. She heard something in my voice and asked if I was coming to the family Christmas, and I told her no, and she told me that was very selfish, and I told her she had no idea what she was talking about, and she hung up. I sat in my new apartment. It had a small window over the kitchen sink. The complex was next to a highway. I could hear the traffic at night, a constant low sound, nothing like the quiet of the house, nothing like the sound of Cora's voice from the next room. I had Cora for Christmas morning. 2 hours. Marcus drove her over at 9 and sat in the car in the parking lot while she came upstairs with her backpack and her stuffed rabbit. She sat on my couch and I gave her the presents I had wrapped and she opened them carefully, the way she did everything, and she thanked me for each one with a sincerity that was entirely her father's, that steadiness, that presence, that capacity for genuine feeling. And then after 2 hours she said she wanted to go back to Daddy, and I walked her down to the parking lot, and I buckled her into her car seat, and Marcus did not look at me, and I watched the car pull away, and I stood in that parking lot in the cold until I couldn't see it anymore. I went back upstairs. I sat on the floor. The custody arrangement became official in February. Primary residency with Marcus, alternating weekends and one weeknight with me, holidays split on a schedule that no child should have to learn to navigate, but children do. They adapt, they become fluent in the geography of divorce, and that fluency costs them something that doesn't show up anywhere in the legal documents. Cora learned it. I watched her learn it over the following months, the way she stopped asking questions about why things were different, the way she stopped mentioning Daddy's house when she was with me as if she had figured out that it made my face do something she didn't want to cause. She was 4 years old and she was already managing my emotions. I lost my job in March. Not directly because of any of this, the official reason was a restructuring, but I had been distracted for months, I had missed things, I had let a client relationship deteriorate because I was managing a personal catastrophe with the same competence I had managed everything else in my life recently, which was to say none. I had 6 weeks of severance and a reference letter that was technically positive and said nothing specific, which told every future interviewer exactly what they needed to know. I moved in with my father in April. My parents had been divorced for 11 years, my mother was not an option for reasons that should be obvious, and my father, a quiet man named Gerald who had remarried and lived 40 minutes outside the city with his wife Carol, let me have the guest room without ceremony or conditions. He did not ask what had happened. He had lived with my mother for 17 years and had developed, during that time, a refined instinct for when questions were not what someone needed. He just made room. He made me coffee in the mornings. He did not offer advice. It was the kindest anyone was to me that entire year. I tried to reach Marcus in May. Not to get him back, I want to be clear about that, not because I had constructed some fantasy of reconciliation, but because there were things I needed to say to him that had nothing to do with what I wanted and everything to do with what he deserved. I drove to the house. Our house, his house now. I sat outside in my car. I watched the lights inside. I could see movement through the kitchen window, shapes, the suggestion of an ordinary evening, the life I had been living 6 months ago that I had taken apart with my own hands. I drove away. He had a new number by June. Janelle confirmed it without telling me what it was. I think about the itinerary sometimes. The one Marcus made for Christmas week. The tree cutting and the cookie baking and the lights downtown. The ring in his drawer. The photographer booked for Christmas Eve. Cora in her dress, not knowing what was happening, just happy to be dressed up and with the two people she loved most in the world. I think about the version of December that existed in his imagination when he planned all of it, the version where we were still whole, the version where he didn't know yet what I had done to us, and I think about the fact that he planned all of that while I was lying to him, while I was in a hotel room with someone who deleted my number without a goodbye. I think about my mother's phone call. The cheerful, breezy certainty that I was available. That I was fine. That my life was a stable, open space that could accommodate whatever the family needed. I think about sitting in that parking garage and listening to every word and then telling her no, I couldn't do it, I had my own life to manage. I had no idea, in that moment, how little of it I had left. There is no version of this story where I am the person who was wronged. I know that. I have had months, now, to sit with a complete and unedited version of what I did, and there is no angle from which it looks different, no context that softens it, no explanation that makes it something other than what it was. I was loved carefully and completely by a good man, and I went looking for something I couldn't even name, and I found it, briefly, in someone who was never going to stay, and I lost everything that actually mattered in the time it takes to cross a line you can't uncross. Cora looked at me differently by summer. Not with anger, she was too young and too kind for anger, but with something more careful. A watchfulness. She had learned that adults leave, that things change without warning, that the world she had counted on could rearrange itself overnight, and she had learned it at 4 years old in a year that was supposed to be full of Christmas lights and castle-shaped toast. I am the reason she knows that. No affair, no consequence, no courtroom, no empty apartment, no parking lot in December watching a car drive away has cost me more than watching my daughter become someone who knows not to depend too completely on anything. She asked me once, near the end of summer, if Santa would know which house to go to. I told her Santa always knew. She nodded, practical, already moving on, already adapting, already so much better at surviving this than I was. I drove home to my father's guest room and sat on the edge of the guest bed and thought about a man who made Christmas itineraries and bought rings in October and coached Saturday soccer on nights after double shifts, and I thought about the exact moment I decided nobody would ever know. 4 words. That's all it took to become someone my daughter watches carefully, someone my partner couldn't look at, someone who missed the proposal, lost the house, left the parking lot, and learned too late that the life you take apart in secret doesn't make a sound when it falls. It just goes quiet. Exactly like a door closing behind someone who has decided they're done.